Success Show with your host, Mac Attram, your business coach. And today you are in for a treat because I have a very experienced entrepreneur who's been an entrepreneur for over 2 decades. I want to hear more and a lot more. His name is Jim James. And Jim James is currently based in the UK, but he has experience all over the world, especially Asia. Jim, welcome to the Business Success Show.
Mac, thank you so much for having me. You make me feel kind of old when you say over 20 years, but yeah, 1995, I went to Singapore to start my first business at the tender age of 27. So I hate to say it, but it is nearly creeping on 3 decades of being self-employed.
There you go. So we've got someone here who's experienced over 3 decades as an entrepreneur, got a wealth of things to share. So we will be talking mostly about Jim's expertise, which is getting people noticed. So, as you know, whichever market you're in, whichever industry you're in, often at some point it becomes crowded. So, how do you get to stand out in a crowded marketplace? So much so that people say, hey, I want to do business with you. Hey, can you help me? Hey, can we talk? So, I've asked Jim to come on here so we can have that conversation because that's his expertise for nearly 3 decades. Getting small businesses, large corporations, and anything in between, and solo one-man band, one-woman band to stand out in a crowded marketplace. So, Jim, welcome again. Jim, tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial background. Go on.
Yeah, well, I know that your audience will want to get to the juice of how they can get themselves noticed. So I'll keep it as quick as I can. But basically, 27 went to Asia to start the PR firm. And then a couple of years later, started an internet business in Singapore, grew the agency, East Public Relations, to be the largest tech B2B agency in Southeast Asia, and then moved to China in 2006 to start the agency there. Imported the first Morgan sports car to China. The reaction was so intense that I approached Morgan and became the importer for China. Then started the British Business Awards in China and the British Motorsport Festival, and imported some drinks from the UK called Wake. And so along the way, I've consulted big companies, like people like Nortel, Philips, for example, on their corporate communication strategy, over 500 clients through the agency. But I think the key, Mac, for your audience, for our listeners today, is that I've also spent my own money on my own PR, So I've been the consultant, but I've also been the brand owner. And
Right.
I've used the same tools, same skills to build brands for big companies and for myself and for fellow entrepreneurs. So came back to the UK 2019,
Mhm.
having, rescinded the business in China, to start my, if you like, my third chapter of entrepreneurship, having done Southeast Asia, North Asia, and now back in Europe. So that's a kind of my odyssey in a hopefully less than a minute.
And then tell me something while we're talking about East and West. In terms of doing business, or specifically in terms of PR or being noticed, whether it's as a brand or as an individual, or as an influencer, or as a business owner, is there much difference? Is there much of a difference between East and West in that particular? Um,
Oh wow, that's a whole lifetimes of experience, and that's a huge question. What's the difference between Asia, if you like, and Europe and America? There are a number, but probably one of the key ones is the difference about the perception of the individual and the collective. So in Europe and America, we kind of celebrate democracy, individuality, going your own way, and so on. And in Asia, it's a much more collectivist sort of a social construct. So
okay.
the idea that you would be rebellious, the sort of James Dean style, I can wear jeans, Marlboro Man thing, wouldn't go down so well in Asia. There's change with the young generation, but because that would be kind of anti-societal. So one of the underlying issues is there's a fundamental difference there around how individuals and society portray themselves, and that manifests itself into brands. Another, and I will share this because I've done B2B Tech. I launched the world's first predictive text technology, for
All right.
example, invented in America, TGIC T9 it was called, but it was first introduced in Asia, in South Korea. And the reason for that, which is the other perhaps point to mention, is that Asians love tech, right?
Mm.
So they have, obviously with Sony being pioneering there with the Walkman, but when it comes to mobile and things tech, the Asian mentality, tends to be more binary in the way that they think, in terms of the logic side of things, they love digital stuff. So that's another really big thing. So you'll see gaming and mobile and broadband technologies really pioneered in Asia, well ahead of Europe and certainly ahead of America.
Yeah, certainly well ahead of the West. And that's what I've noticed as well, having spent so much time in Asia over the last, well, not as long as you, but over a decade anyway.
Yeah.
So let's get into this part. So for our listeners here, thinking, hey, I do like the sound of being noticed. I haven't thought about that before. So how do I get noticed? What are some maybe 2 or 3 tips you can give me as an entrepreneur that says do these things and it'll differentiate you from the masses and you can then stand out so much so people are drawn to you.
I think the first point I'd like to share is that everything is a story.
Mm,
And to think of your business as a story and yourself as a protagonist in that story. And if you do that, Mac, then you're not worried about scale, you're not worried about technology. And perhaps if I give you an example of how I used my own story to launch Morgan in China.
mm,
So so what I do is I imported a car to China, but of course I didn't have a budget, and I was an entrepreneur, a foreign entrepreneur in China with a
mm.
car. What I do is I drove that car into the Forbidden City.
Okay.
Yeah, I drove this Morgan Roadster.
Mm.
It's a British Racing Green,
Uh,
silver spokes and everything, and I parked this car in front of Tiananmen Square. And that obviously is such a wonderful juxtaposition between communism and the emperors and so on and British tradition. It didn't take any money, but it took kind of just a story. My story was I'm bringing the best of British classic cars to Asia. So in that photo moment, I built a whole story, a whole narrative. I happened to take a journalist with me, by the way, that I'd met socially, and we got some pictures. And with those pictures, before the police came, which of course they did, and whisked us away, I got enough photographs to get that onto the front cover of a magazine, and from there I was able to sell some cars. So I think first of all, if you, as an entrepreneur, take a step back and say, just what am I doing here? Who am I doing it for? How can I create a story that other people will get emotional about?
mm.
Because it's the emotional connection between you as an entrepreneur and your customers and your partners and your potential members of staff that gets the momentum in the business and therefore in the brand. So first of all, I'd say, and I call it storification, Mac, I call it storification. Think about your business as a story, not as a service, not as a product, not as a price, but as a story. So that'd be the first place I would start.
Number one.
Yep.
Fantastic. Good, good, good. So that would be the first place you'll start.
Yep.
Okay. And so what I'm hearing you say then is doesn't matter what business you're in, what brand you have, the question to ask is what is the story here? And stories, like you said, people emotionally connect with stories rather than the facts, rather than here's a Morgan English classic car and it's got this size engine and it's got this color seats and it's got these kind of wheels. Yes, they can see that, they can read that up. But here's a story of this English gentleman bringing a classic English car to our region of the world. What's going on here? What is this? And the journalist tells a story. Now there's an angle. We need to contact this guy. I mean, he may have something that we can tap into here.
And I think, Mac, what you've already done intuitively is you've articulated the power of the story. And that is that it gets the person who's listening or watching or hearing that story to ask questions.
Mm,
Because the story doesn't answer everything. But if you lead with facts, if I'd come in, this a V6, Euro 5 compliant, People are like, oh, okay, well, then you've answered those for me.
Yeah.
But if you start with a story, that means different things to different people. And that generates a curiosity around the brand and around you. And then you're seen as someone who is introducing and narrating that story. And that's a really powerful position and really the central role, pivotal role that an entrepreneur should play in their category.
Absolutely. I love that. It's fantastic. Jim, for those listening thinking, but Jim, I'm not a storyteller. I'm not a storyteller. Where do I start? What's your answer to that?
Well, I would say that we all tell stories,
Mm,
and we've always told stories, and we've certainly always loved stories because they are, as we know, how people accommodate information. So we're storytellers intuitively, whether it's to our partners, to our friends, to our parents, to our children, to the people we play golf with, or the people we go fishing with. Oh, you should have seen the one that got away, right? We
mm,
all tell stories. I think, Mac, what happens is that there becomes this kind of filter that says, I don't tell the right story, or I don't tell the story in a very compelling way. So we set a threshold for ourselves, which then, a bit like, if you've ever run a marathon, people go, well, I'm going to run, but I'm going to run a 4 hour, as opposed to the first one, just, get through the first half a marathon
right.
first, right? So we set these kind of big challenges for ourselves. We say, I'm not that articulate, I'm not that good at painting or drawing. It doesn't matter, if you like, the quality of the story. What matters is the authenticity of the story. So it's not the
Mm,
quality, it's the authenticity, because
right.
quality is actually really subjective. You
Yeah.
might think that something's good, I may say something's bad. Authenticity, though, how real I am, is judged naturally as human to human. We go, I trust that person.
Right.
And what we're really looking for in that story is, oh, I can understand where that person's come from. I trust that person to take me on a journey to solve my own problems, for example. So storytelling, I would argue that everyone is a storyteller. But the other thing is, of course, that storytelling is something that we can practice, right? It's something we can learn. So for anyone that's picked up a sport, you don't pick up a tennis racket and start whacking the balls in a rally straight away, right? And you
No.
have to learn. And storytelling is an art. If it's going to become part of your business, there are many, many people that have storytelling courses now and so on. But it's an art of how we start to put in place the chapters, how we put in place what we call, the hero's journey, for example.
Right.
So there are some tools and some methodologies and some great podcasts, like a guy called Park Howell's got one called Business of Story. So, Mac, everyone is a storyteller. Some are maybe a little bit of a fibber sometimes. Some of us have to bend the truth, but we're all telling stories. And it's the authenticity, but there are ways, really easy, free ways to learn the skill, to learn about timing, pacing, use of color, use of metaphor, use of allegory. It's just a skill to be learned, to be
It can
enhanced.
be learned. That's
Yeah.
good to know. At least people know there is help out there, books, podcasts, like you suggested as well. Now, Jim, I want to ask you this. You spent many years in PR, public relations, and helping brands stand out. Where, what, what part does public relation play for any small business? Because some say, look, I just want leads. I just want to do my marketing. If I put money in public relations, I don't see a return. I just want to sell. I just need to sell. What part? And is there a particular size you need to reach before you say, actually, let me do some public relation now, or does it not matter?
Okay, right. A couple of questions in there, aren't there, Mac? I think
Well,
if I could take it in reverse order, I would say that there is no need to be large or small. Public relations is something that is actually happening whether you like it or not. It's happening for all of us because public relations is really what we radiate, right? It's the energy and the signals that we send out and how people then feel and interpret how we behave. So public relations, what we communicate is taking place all the time. What happens if you have an agency or if you start to think about it is it becomes a structured and a structured approach, it becomes, if you like, a mindful approach to what people are thinking about you, a mindful approach to how you're communicating. But we all communicate whether we like it or not by what we wear, how we drive, what we put on LinkedIn. We're all communicating because other people are looking for clues and signals all the time about us. So I'd first of all say that, PR, whether it's your local school, the primary school, for example, near you, they have a reputation. That's why some parents do and don't want to go there. A restaurant has a reputation, whether you like it or not. That's PR, right? They may not do any marketing, but that restaurant that has good word of mouth
Yeah.
will succeed in the one that has a bad word of mouth from friends and so on. So the second point then is about the role that PR plays in lead gen. If no one knows who you are, and the first thing that they receive is something from you about you and what they should buy from you, they have no, if you like, bank of trust built up about you and your brand, right? So if you go to a place and you've never heard them, or never heard of them before, say if you go to a country and you've done no research before, when you get off the plane, you go to a completely new place. I went to Morocco recently, right? And we went to Morocco and my kids are like, oh God, it's very scary. Well, what,
Square.
yeah, and well, what language do they speak, and what money do they use, and so on, right? So that's why then people stay in the hotel, because actually they're afraid of going out. But if you've done a bit of research before you get to Marrakesh, these are the souks, this is the food, this is so. So what's happening is all that work, all that knowledge that the market has about you is the PR. It's things that you've done or said or communicated, so that when actually you go to that person and say, hey, I'm from this country. Oh yeah, I've already heard you work for Vodafone. I may not have bought anything from Vodafone already, but I've already seen, I've read, I've heard. So I would say that what happens is the PR enables the funnel, because without PR, people aren't going to even want to get into your funnel because they won't have got any awareness or any understanding. And most importantly, Matt, they won't have got any trust.
True.
And as you know better than anybody, because I know this is what you're doing when you're doing joint ventures and so on, if people don't trust each other,
No.
they're not going to work together. So PR, I think, starts and is for any size, right? Because it is how you build a reputation for yourself. But I think without that, then there is no funnel, because people have got too much distrust of your brand. So I would say it's happening whether you like it or not. So you might as well embrace it and manage it and make it what you want it to be, so that it really feeds the funnel.
Great answer. While we're on the subject of PR, because you've got such a rich experience in public
Thank
relations,
you.
helping people, helping organizations. And one thing I've found through doing structured public relations with agencies is that public relations actually helps to close the sales better. It makes it easier to close the sales. If someone's seeing you, in my case, in Forbes or Huffington Post or Sky Television or Guardian newspaper, in my case, it just makes it a sale easier, because it builds that level of trust, like you said.
Yeah. And credibility, Mac. So,
Credibility.
because somebody else, and if it's the media, someone else that is trusted by your audience has already done some validation for you, right? So it's all about, a journalist saying, okay, well, I have all the journalists and all the people I could interview. I want to interview you, Mac, because that means that then they've done some research. They've seen that you are, trustworthy, you're honest, you can bring value to the conversation. So what happens is, for the audience that then ring you or think about ringing you, to some degree, they've abdicated some responsibility for their own due diligence, right? Because saying the media's already done it, right? And of course, this is the issue now with social media, that you can create your own content in your own channels. And what some people are doing, though, is they're to some degree abusing that channel, because they're saying, because I own it, I will say what I like to say about myself. And that's very, if you like, rewarding. And in the short term, what happens is when I work with clients, they say, I want you to tell the market this about me. And you say, well, actually, can I just reflect? That's not necessarily what the market thinks about you, or it's not necessarily what the market is thinking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens often is there's the disconnect, Matt, between what the company, the founder would like to say, often in a slightly insecure way. They want to convince people that they're right. Actually, they should use the social channels to prompt conversations, to share information as a thought leader,
Right.
rather than to be saying, I'm good, this is why you should work with me. So that's why often PR gets a bad name. It's not because the process is bad, but how it's managed is often misunderstood and come at from the wrong direction. Excuse me.
Got it. Got it. It's a great point that you brought in terms of social media and people abusing their particular platform. And there's nothing more powerful than someone else singing your praises, someone else building you, endorsing you, building your credibility than you do that on your own. So I wanted to go down a specific route now, Jim, which is how, in your eyes, how has public relations changed over the last 3 decades to where we are now? Because clearly it must have done, or it would have done. So I'm talking about, paid for strategic public relations, both to promote a brand and also maybe to rescue a brand. We've had some incidences the past few years where the CEO has said this and the company has gone down because of badly managed PR.
Yeah, it's a great question. And 3 decades, I mean, really, you're talking about the introduction of the internet, obviously 95,
Yeah.
96, right, with Yahoo coming on board, and then mobile, from 2006 onwards, really. Well, that's the iPhone, but late 90s being like the Ericssons and Nokias, dating myself a little bit here, Mac. I think there are a couple of strands that are fundamental changes in the way that PR has impacted entrepreneurs. Overall, by the way, the greatest transformation is the empowerment of the entrepreneur. Technology has democratized communication in a way that you could never have dreamt of. It's probably the greatest changes since the Gutenberg press, because now you and I can, make video. I was doing an Amazon live stream yesterday with some people in Detroit,
Okay.
right? So, with an internet connection and a screen and a camera, anyone can communicate either one to one or one to many. And that's a fundamental shift. And that's transformative for entrepreneurs that know how to do it. So that's the first thing. The second is that the trust has really dissipated. So, 20, 25 years ago, if you read something in the Times or the Guardian
Mm.
or online, you go, okay, well, it's written in the Times. That's it. And there was one authority, and there was kind of one truth, and there was the BBC
Right.
and then the BBC Four, right? So there was the truth, and then there was kind of what people maybe gossiped about. But in the last certainly 15 years, really this degradation of trust, the proliferation of channels has meant that the editorial integrity hasn't always been as rigorous across all the channels, because some have gone for commercial gain, for example, or for sensationalism. So the second thing is that the channels no longer have the trust that they used to have and the authority. And the third is the pace of communication, right? The pace, and not just only locally, but globally. So technology, which I mentioned, at the beginning of this, is responsible for really the globalization of information simultaneously, right? I mean, we've all read The World is Flat, right? The
Yeah.
Friedman book. I remember back in, early 90s, we would do a product launch in Europe at a trade show. And then a week later, you could do a product launch in Asia a week later. And the people in Asia had not heard any news. There was no bleed.
Mm.
But now, really, we just schedule for time zones, right? You try and find the best time zone for a simultaneous global launch.
Right. Right.
So I did some work for a company called Ineos, the Grenadier, this new 4x4, fabulous
Okay.
car. And we were launching it in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand for Grenadier. But at the same time, it's happening in Germany, and in Austria and also in America, right? So the globalization of the message is also, and the sort of simultaneous nature of it means that from a content perspective, as an entrepreneur, you need to be much more prepared. It used to be that you could prepare information for one market and then send it to another. But now you need to have these reserves ready. So kind of you need to have your artillery fully armed before you even shoot the first bullet. You can't shoot a bullet and then see what comes back to you.
Right.
You have to be fully prepared. So really impact of technology, degradation of trust, and if you like, the simultaneous global nature of information. Those would be three. There are a few more.
Those would be journey over 3 decades, and I think you summed it up very, very well there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jim, by the way, for those who want to connect with you, what's the easiest, best method to follow up with you, connect with you?
Yeah, well, you can come to the unnoticed.cc, which is a website I just built for the podcast, and I have the books on there as well, and my contact details are there. So just the unnoticed.cc, Mac. I think that's probably the easiest place.
Awesome. I'm going to come back to you in a moment just to give us some of your last words in regards. Anything else you want to talk about, unnoticed or PR or anything like that. For those who are with us, our audience here, I want to say make sure you follow, you subscribe if you need to, and also leave some comments in terms of what have you picked up from James in this conversation here. What have you learned about PR? What difference does it make to you? What questions do you have for Jim? And anything else that you enjoyed about this particular show. So, Jim, over to you. Anything you want to add? Any final words about getting noticed, or anything about PR before we finish off?
Yeah, Mac. There's a new formula that I'm working on called the Active Communications Index, and it's basically content times channels times frequency, and it gives you a number. Okay. And the reason I like to share that is because most entrepreneurs, most business owners, in fact, most marketing people don't know how much PR to do. They don't know how much to do. And you get a really lumpy performance. They do a lot at a trade show or a product launch, and then they go on holiday. So the key to communication is consistency.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be high frequency. It does have to be consistent.
Right.
So I would say the last message to leave with our listeners today is that, at least when you start communicate consistently. Don't worry about being perfect. Don't worry about being the best. Be authentic. I'll come back to my first point. It's about being authentic, not about being perfect. And to think about the content that you produce being for other people, the channels being the channels which is where they like to receive information rather than where you're comfortable necessarily talking. Ideally, they're one and the same, by the way. I mean, if they're your audience, you're probably hanging out in the same kind of places. And in terms of frequency, cadence can change according to industry, according to demographic. There isn't a right or wrong. But what is right or wrong is to be consistent, because in order for people to trust you and to get to be receptive to your message, they have to come to expect it. Just like, and if you're a parent, you give your children consistent feedback. Or if you're a manager, you give consistent reviews to your team.
Of course.
Communication with the media or through your own channels is the same. So the Active Communications Index, ACI, I've got some charts and some things about this. But the whole idea of PR is that you're consistent. You're yourself and you're consistent, and that you're just doing your best to serve your audience. And then actually, Mac, it's good fun, right? Because if you do it right, you help people that you care about, and in turn, your business will grow.
Makes sense. Nothing else I need to add to that. Well said, Jim. So on that subject, I would say, Jim, thank you very much on that note for bringing your wealth of information, your wealth of expertise, and furnishing us with all that as well. So I want to say thank you for your time and your energy.
Mac, thank you so much for inviting me on your brilliant podcast. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Thank you all for listening in. Until next time, continue to share, continue to follow, continue to subscribe, and also leave notes and let us know what you thought. Mac Attram here, Business Success Show. Until next time, bye for now. Take care.